Hey everybody, this presentation will address requirements that are in D1.1 related to welding procedures that are qualified by testing. Pre-qualified WPSs in Clause 3 we'll talk about a little bit later. So why have a welding procedure? And I'm not going to read through this slide for you. I'm going to just talk a little bit about it. I want you to read the information that I've got up there, and I'll touch on some of it. You know, in the world of welding, there's a great many industries and companies that have different requirements. Some of those companies are successful without even having a written WPS. They may not comply with the code or even have a quality system. But as inspectors, we may not decide that a code must be complied with or that a company must have a quality system. However, if we're responsible for ensuring that the welders have adequate information for completing a weld, some documentation may be helpful. If a written quality system is in place or an industry code or standard is part of the company's operation, a WPS is probably required. Welding is considered a special process. Okay, in my opinion, a special process is something that can't be verified as suitable or acceptable by just looking at the completed process. Having a system in place that helps assure that some things are done before, during, and after welding will help make sure that the same results occur each time. A welding procedure can help with this when it's coupled with a welder that has the ability to perform the welding. Sometimes welding has been performed fine over the years without any documentation or codes, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be an issue in the future. As an inspector, that may or may not be my concern. If I'm in a position to help improve quality, maybe a few suggestions wouldn't hurt though. A WPS has been properly verified to achieve good results. It can be a great asset for an organization interested in continuous improvement, regardless of what the requirements are. But in some cases, the welds are completed every day with no issue. If a company is referring to a code or standard for their product or their services, you can be almost 100% positive that a WPS is required. Not only is a WPS required, but in most codes and standards, there are plenty more requirements that are intended to be complied with, not just having a WPS and a welder qualified. For the rest of this presentation, we're going to try to stick with what AWS D1.1 says. In many cases, WPSs are documents that are only seen by inspectors, auditors, management types. I've seen cases in steel fabrication facilities where the welder is never given a WPS, but as inspectors, we can sit around for hours reviewing these super high-tech documents. So we're going to go over a few things where AWS mentions WPSs and some responsibilities, besides just in the clauses about WPSs. Now, if a company is doing work in accordance with D1.1, they have responsibilities. It's more than just WPSs and qualified welders. You know, for example, this one, contractors responsible for the WPS is the qualification of the welding, the contractor's inspection, and performing the work. Okay, so there's more to it than just having some documentation. The place that WPSs are mentioned are in paragraph 2.3.2, talking about Sharpie V-notch tests. You know, notch toughness requirements would require WPS to have much tighter controls on the variables. Some of those variables can cause the impact, strength, notch toughness to change quite a bit. So those requirements are much more restricted for changes that could affect heat input, sometimes the materials and things of that nature. So here's another paragraph that mentions WPSs besides just qualifying. Minimum size of welds, PJP groove welds in accordance with a WPS, qualified in conformance with Clause 4. So it's another condition where the pre-qualified WPS may not work and a procedure qualified by testing is required. A few more places, you know, the fabrication clause in Clause 5 mentions the WPS quite a few times. I'm not really sure why paragraph 5313 mentions the WPS requirements of 5.5, essentially saying the same thing. 5.6, same thing. You know, multiple references. Notice the requirement for the welder to be informed in the proper use. The WPS may not have to be in the hands of the welder, but it needs to be available to the welder. If I came in to inspect some completed welds, this would be a hard one to verify. If I was monitoring process work for compliance with D1.1, then I could and should check this out. Here's a requirement just for tack welds and construction aids. Okay, in my opinion, one of the most important welds that's probably ever made to shop is typically going to be a lifting lug. But right here is a requirement that a construction aid shall be made with a qualified or pre-qualified WPS and by qualified personnel. Keep that in mind. So if you think the guy that's operating the punch or the drill can fix some holes that he mislocated, you just weld them up. Doesn't look like that's the case. It's specifically addressed for mislocated holes here in paragraph 5.25.5. For these specific items that are listed on this slide, I want you to go read each one of these paragraphs. Read it, write it down, remember it. So, all in all, AWS D1.1 refers to WPSs throughout the code book. It's one of the many requirements to complying with the code is to have a qualified WPS or a pre-qualified WPS, but it's by no means the only requirement. Being familiar with what the code says and requires is important as a weld inspector. You may not be called on in the future to actually write a WPS or qualify one, but you should be familiar with what's required as far as when you have a WPS, and also be able to verify that the WPS is suitable for the job and complies with the code. Let me know if you have any questions.